Young people are a crucial part of transforming the climate crisis into a more promising future, but their voices are seldom included in discussions of how to reshape our societies in response to the threats of climate change. Beth Osnes wants to change this and get young people more involved in these crucial climate conversations. She is a theater artist who works with young people in fun and creative ways to make theater that engages the climate crisis. Her performances allow young people, with their imaginations, their movements, and their bodies, to enact both the tragedies and utopic possibilities of the ecological crisis moment we all inhabit. Beth is a professor of theater and environmental studies at the University of Colorado Boulder, where she co-directs an initiative for creative climate communication called Inside the Greenhouse. She co-developed an online collection of climate-related resources, tools, and activities for students called Enacting Climate. Her work has won support from the National Science Foundation. We discuss her climate musical called Shine, which is available for free through open source materials to any educators or others who want to put on performances in their own schools or communities. I recorded this conversation on November 1st, 2022. I'm John Fiege, and this is Chrysalis. You can subscribe at johnfiege.earth, where you will also find show notes and all episodes of the podcast, plus my writing, photographs, and films. Here is Beth Osnes. Can you start by telling me about your youth-led community performance, Shine, and maybe take us through the experience of encountering and putting on this show from the perspective of one of the young people who might be involved in the performance?
Great, you bet. So for the perspective of a young person coming into the experience of Shine, they may be told that they're going to do a mini musical in a day or two that is going to show them the human relationship between climate, energy, and human development. And they may say, wow, that sounds kind of heady. But then when they encounter it, they're going to realize that there are really fun anthropomorphic roles that some of their classmates and them will be playing. There's the sun, and then there's fossil fuels, which is a fast kind of character that has a lot of energy and pent-up energy. And then a bunch of them are going to be playing all these different roles. Some of them will be portraying ancient plants and animals where they really get embodied, and they have to put on these full-body green lycra suits with a leafy sash to represent ancient plants. And then they're going to be asked to, with their bodies, dramatize to really embody the different aspects of photosynthesis in a really fast way. So they have to get energy from the sun, and then they have to, that excites their cells. And you could just imagine them wiggling around, having their cells be excited. And they're in these green morph suits, so they kind of lose a sense of, self-consciousness because they're costumed, they're masked. And that's just like a mechanism for many of us that we just get more expressive and more into our bodies.
Right.
And then some of the students have these big cape, painted costumes that they are ancient animals who come and eat the ancient plants. And then they all have to do this big death scene on stage, which they adore, where they all have to die. And then they get covered up by this big, huge brown sheet that represents all this sand and dirt and sediment that they get pressed beneath and become fossil fuels. So they're enacting all these different, they're the thing that we find is embodying concepts
Right.
is really beneficial for learners. So they're learning all this stuff through a really embodied, dramatic, and funny script.
Awesome. And how did you come to this kind of work? What?
I came to this because I was invited to the 100 Resilient Cities initiative when we did it here in Boulder, Colorado. Boulder was one of the first cities to be accepted of the 33 of the first year's cohort. And I went to this meeting, and all the fancy folks from New York came from the Rockefeller Foundation, and we had all of our stakeholders here in Boulder there. And I was there, and I was excited, and it seemed like such an exciting project to be really proactively planning for resilience in both a climate sense, but also in these social systems that are interlocking with all of these. And there was no youth represented, and there were no youth there, and there was no plan for including their voices and their contributions and their needs and their perspectives. So that's when I really thought, this is my role. I'm going to come up with a fun way to really include youth voices in planning their own city's plan for resilience.
Oh, that's cool. And had you done this kind of community-based and youth-led type work before?
Oh, yeah. I'd done a lot of work. I had partners in the Navajo Nation. Gerald Vanderveer and Adrian Manygoats were two wonderful partners. We did a lot of programming there for clean energy awareness in the schools, primarily in Tuba High School. And I've been doing youth organizing, activizing, using performance as a tool for young people to have a voice for self-advocacy and civic advocacy for, decades. So this was really building on that work.
Oh, cool. And did you come to theater from activism, or did you find activism within theater at some point?
I had two things. I had like these two separate parts of my life. And it took me a while to realize that they could work together. And when they did, I was so happy because I felt like one person. So I think I had this artistic life where I was doing these performances, and I leaned towards these kind of civic-minded, political activist type performances. And then I also was doing activist work. And when they came together, it was like the Reese's peanut butter cups, Yay, this is way more delicious and fun.
Just had a conversation with my kids this morning about Reese's peanut butter cups.
Well, it was Halloween last night.
It was Halloween. Well, I love this idea of the 2-act play, where the first act is everything that's happened up to the present. and the second act is what happens in the future. And it feels like this remarkably simple and universal dramatic structure. How did you come to this structure of the piece?
Well, I wanted young people to understand the past, and when we say past, I mean really the past, because we want to go back to the Carboniferous period to say, when were these fossil fuels being formed, to understand that this is a finite resource. Sure, we could create more, but it would take millions and millions of years. So, we might as well think of this as a non-renewable form of energy.
Right.
And then I wanted them to realize that, like, they were handed this history of this very recent history of overconsumption of fossil fuels and this really extraction from the earth in really recent, decades and centuries. And then to understand that the future has not yet been written, that we can stop at this point, notice the impact, mourn it, kind of understand it and go, whoa, that's a big impact. And then say, okay, this is where this path has led us. Where do we want to go from here? How do we want to author a future forward? And that's where the young people really get to shine, when they really start to put their energy and ingenious ideas towards a sustainable future.
Yeah, for sure. It's really awesome how participatory it is, not just in the performance, but in the creation of it, in the writing.
One of the things we came up against too which lended itself to more work, but it was great and it just launched, was we realized that when we worked with young people, there was one school we worked with in Golden, Colorado, where all these kids came up with these great ideas, but they were all how to pick up trash. And we realized, picking up trash is not actually a climate solution. It's just aesthetic.
Right.
So we thought kids need access to top climate solutions. And I had already been partnering with Project Drawdown when they did their Project Drawdown Learn conferences. So I'd been working with this organization that really identified the top climate solutions and has really been recognized globally as a leader in doing that. And so then we took their top climate solutions and we adapted them to a 5th grade learner. And that's available on enactingclimate.org. And so you can get access to all the materials with Shine, and you can get access to all the materials of these top climate solutions in vibrant language with a lot of illustrations and teacher guides and glossaries and all that stuff online, open source, free at enactingclimate.org.
That's super cool. Yeah, that's really awesome.
And that was Patrick Chandler who did that heavy lift with me.
Oh, cool.
We really enjoyed doing that together. And a lot of students at CU Boulder contributed.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's awesome. Well, that's great to pull all that together. Well, one of the most powerful moments in the performance for me was when the humans wove this giant fabric that symbolized the social fabric, and then the fossil fuels came and tore it apart.
Yep.
and it's a violent and striking scene, and I was just really curious if you could share how various participants have reacted to that scene and experienced it.
Yeah. I think one of the most dramatic instances was when I was doing it at Tuba City in Arizona, which is part of the Navajo Nation. And there were a lot of kids involved in this project who were Hopi as well, because the Hopi Nation is right there near Tuba City as well. And for those kids, especially the ones who were Diné, Navajo, they said that weaving is such an important part of their culture. So they really resonated with that. And the kids take a lot of time to illustrate those strips of fabric or those strips of, they're actually strips of paper, different colored, but they really represent the threads of community. And they illustrate those with all the different assets and things about their community. So they're really exploring what is unique to my community that I value, that are characteristics unique to my community. And then when that does get woven together, it's really beautiful, and it's an embodied process where it's really glorious to see it revealed, and it's more beautiful than the sum of its parts. And then when it gets ripped through by the storm that's induced through overconsumption of fossil fuels, there were gasps in the audience, and people start to feel what's at stake. Our communities are at stake. We see this with all these different natural disasters that are being brought on by this intensification of weather. And that's what's at stake. And it doesn't, like we can start to really feel the impact of our consumer actions and our use of energy and the impact we're all having on climate. So it's a strong image, but I think we need
Yeah.
it. And I think the young people who have been a part of it get it. And they're like, yes, let's do it. When they want to do that scene, you can, because the thing is, they've only done the paper once, so they can only really enact it once for the performance. And they go for it. They want the audience to understand that it's their future.
Right.
Their future is being ripped
Yeah,
through.
and of course, the Navajo Nation is one of the first communities that's, like, completely gotten off fossil fuels and built that massive solar power plant that they own and run now, which is, awesome.
Well, and the sadness, I dedicated my book on this performance to Gerald Vandeveer, who was an amazing educator, a Diné man, head of the football team, just such a great, vibrant person. And he actually died of cancer because of the high cancer rates due to the extraction of fossil fuels from the area.
The
So
mining.
it's just so poignant how much that gets felt in the bodies and the loss that we incur with.
Well, in the creation of this project, you worked with climate scientists in
Yes.
both the conception and the writing of the performance. Can you talk about that experience and what you learned
You
through it?
bet. So I find, the thing is there's some younger climate scientists like Joshua Sperling, who's amazing. He's at the National Center for, no, the NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory here in Golden, Colorado. And then Patty Romero-Lenko, who was formerly at NCAR, the National Renewable Energy Lab, or the National Center for, NCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research. And now she's at NREL as well. And these two scientists really were my main points of contact, although I consulted so many others. But Patty is a musician, and so is Joshua, and they understood the value of this kind of more emotional connection, especially for young people, to really care about the science of climate. And so Patty Romero-Lenko, I mean, she was on her way back from the Paris talks, and she was helping do translation. And Joshua is somebody who helped get us into one of the UN conferences, our performances, one of the UN conferences in New York City when we were touring it, and really championed it, but also put their bodies on the line. They performed in the piece in several instances when it was in Boulder and in New York City. Really went to validate youth voices by going through the process of the rehearsal process, where a lot of that is the young people engaging in the actual issues in the science and how it impacts human life, and them having these deep, rich conversations with scientists. That was always built into the process. So at each location, there were experts who were, appropriate to be working with the young people from their area. So it was really always built into the design of the entire kind of narrative framework experience for the young people and for their communities.
Yeah, well, and I feel like that underscores this place where we are right now where, we are in this world that's so siloed and so separated by, not just politically and culturally, but also within disciplines and ways of approaching problems, and it's problematic. and we talk a lot about how artists have to become scientifically literate in order to understand these things, but the opposite's also true. Like we need scientists to become artistically literate and
Yeah.
appreciate what the arts and humanities and those types of ways of thinking and ways of communicating can more effectively communicate science in a lot of ways.
And what we're finding is there's even a lack of trust in science, that we have this kind of weird reality right now where people are really looking to other sources. And there are a lot of, geoscience communication article recently published in 2022 saying that we really need to go to an art science approach to communicating these aspects of climate, because there is so much mistrust in news, fake news, misinformation, perceptions of doubt that have been introduced. So to have your own children, your own prodigy, be the communicators to you, and it's specific to your community, that can really bypass some of these already created defenses to receiving new information and really let it in and help us really all understand why we should care and why we do care, because we want a future for our children that's thrivable and
Yeah,
survivable
for sure.
and equitable.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, it's exciting to see it all coming together because it's long overdue that everyone's just talking in their bubbles.
Well, and it's also funny that you put it in a musical, and then you've got people humming that last "shine, shine, 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 shine," and that's just like stuck in their heads. That's what they do, and that musical message just stays with everybody, and it's associated with a moment of joy, with a moment of release, where you've gone through this whole play, and then at the end, it's like, no, we have reason to celebrate. We have solutions that we can be enacting. We have the creativity and the genius and the desire to make a
Yeah.
difference. And that's celebratory.
Right. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, and, despite the fact that you've done this type of work for a long time, you could have easily written this whole thing yourself and
Mhm.
worked with a professional cast to put on the performance in schools and communities all over the world. But why do it this way instead? Like what does the community, what do the participants, what do they get out of it that they wouldn't get out of it if it were more of a standard, the performers do the performance and the audience does the watching?
Well, part of it is like I'm the youngest of 10 kids. So by the time I was 6 years old, I was an aunt, and I loved being an aunt.
Wow.
I was putting on plays with my nieces and nephews, my nibblings, and I've been doing that ever since. And I just I just prefer the company of young people. They just aren't so inured into the status quo. They have a little bit more open sense of possibilities. They're just a little bit fresher. They're not defending their already made choices. I just prefer it. And I also just love that opening, the discovery moments. And I selfishly just get fed by this. I get to play. I get to be in that moment of discovery with them and kind of see the wonder through their eyes. And I also just feel like it's the most like I'm kind of in this to like I'm in this. I'm a full professor. I don't need any more promotions.
Right.
I've got a job like that, like I've got the most secure job on the
Right.
planet, a tenured professor. I'm in this to reverse global
Yeah.
warming for an equitable, sustainable, thrivable future. So I'm in it for the end game. Like that's what I want to
Right.
do. And if I'm just being as smart as I can be with all the information I have at my disposal, young people are the place where I'm going to put my energy. I'm not going to bother with adults.
Yeah, right. That's a good approach. Well, and, can you talk a little bit about, kids do all kinds of educational activities, but, like, what do you see that they absorb and that they learn, that they understand when they are part of the creation and the performance, if they're, like, part of that creative process rather than just being um, an audience member who receives the creative process.
I think that what they get from this is that they have adults who are celebrating them being disruptors of the status quo, of reality. And when you have, and there's like this reversal that happens because I use my privilege as a university professor with all these ties to the climate and clean energy sector. And we're just in this, all these different places. I've got enough allies that can get us where we can reverse these public spaces. We can do a performance at the National Center for Atmospheric Research where the young people are the communicators of climate action to the scientists. We can do this at a UN conference for the city we want in New York City, where we're at the New School and the young people are communicating to all those delegates and experts who are convened for this all-day conference, and we're the plenary thing. So like we can create these reversals where they're disrupting and they're saying we demand a joyful future, and they're doing it in a way that is constructive, that is from their perspective, that is contributing ideas and energy. And so I think that it's the validation of their disruptive ability that is probably the thing that is the most impactful and the most thing that they would take from it.
Yeah, and the other thing it made me think about is, people say the best way to learn something is to teach it, and you don't quite appreciate that until you become a teacher. And you're
Yes.
like, "Oh, I really have to know this." Like, you don't realize how much you just kinda skimmed by previously. You just understood just enough. And then when you're teaching it, you need to understand it in more depth so that you can communicate it in different ways and answer questions and all this stuff. And it seems like there's part of that going on here when you have to write something and think about it and perform it and embody it and move your body in a way that communicates something. You have to understand it on a different level than you do when you're just sitting there even taking notes or watching or listening or whatever.
And we're really bringing to force, this is designed to bring to force all the benefits of being grounded in the best of the known life and physical sciences, being informed by the most recent and most up-to-date social sciences around what makes for effective climate communication, and then expressed through the arts using, really like pulling in artists who are really at the top of their game. Tom Wassinger, who wrote the music, is he's won awards all over. Like, he's got Grammys. Arthur Frederick, who was the choreographer for this, he works with the National Dance Institute in New York City. He was in Jerome Robbins' West Side Story when it was on Broadway. Like, he's somebody who understands how to help young people access excellence through physical expression. So really pulling together this artistic excellence towards all these things coming together, you can really set young people up for success, that they're going to really be supported in being able to make that expression. And like you said, they're having to make so many choices and really understand it in order to express and perform and enact their solutions.
Yeah. It also makes me think about kind of both sides of this, but we live in this world of blockbusters and movie stars and award ceremonies, um, and whether it's sports or art or music or performance, our culture seems really obsessed in finding the best and the biggest and the loudest. But when we take all of these activities and creative relationships out of communities and into this international spotlight, um, when we only let professionals be creative and move their bodies rather than just sitting, something is lost there. Like, how do you think about this tension in our
Well, I
contemporary
mean,
culture?
it's so interesting because we have these superstars, but we also have this growing movement of people going to cosplay
Uh,
where they want to dress
right.
up, they want to interact, where people are doing live action role play where they want to do it, they want to be part of this fictional worlding. And, so we have these dual movements. And I think once people give up that kind of passive role of just being a recipient of a completed, already, you know, done, yeah, like a consumer of some kind of narrative or experience, when they get to experience being the creators, and I think something happens. And I think when you get it localized, when it's about you, like even if you're watching your young people perform, it's about your community, and that's a very different thing. It's a framework experience of a performance that can be personalized and taken on by each group of young people to be relevant to their own community context.
It also makes you see some of these industries in a different light of,
Yeah.
whether it's Netflix or Broadway or Hollywood, they have monopolies that they're trying to protect.
I hope it increases the critical capacity of these young people as well. Once you become a creator, you become a more critical recipient
Right.
of these media messages. And I think that really is what we need for our citizenry moving into the
Yeah,
future
for sure.
and current time.
Well, you mentioned earlier this idea that, in one of your performances, a bunch of, pretty much it sounds like all the kids were just talking about garbage and picking up litter,
Yes.
and you saw this need to bring in this high level thinking and understanding about what effective climate solutions might be. Um, I was thinking about that also because I watched one of your performances online, um, and in the second act of the performance, when the young people have kind of taken the role of writer and this
Hmm.
part of it and come up with their own climate solutions, I found that in this one performance in particular, a lot of those a lot of those solutions were, things that we hear a lot about in terms of going to sustainable energy and getting away from fossil fuels, and getting rid of plastic bags. And all those things are totally fine and good. But at the same time, I felt like, you know, um, do they have a tendency to repeat what they're hearing in the media
Yes.
versus like how do you think about pushing them to think outside of the box and come up with approaches that might be more uncomfortable or more disruptive or go beyond these kind of big technological shifts in the economy, which so many people agree that we need, but no one seems to know how to pull off. And we hear about that stuff. It's like you can think it would be very easy to watch the news and think, oh, as soon as we all are driving Teslas, then it's all going to be fine,
Yes.
which is certainly not the case. So how do you tackle that challenge really?
Well, one of the things is this switch over to, as Patrick Chandler and I have started working with the Enacting Climate.org with the access to the fifth grade level top climate solutions identified by Project Drawdown. The top climate solution is reducing food waste. And the thing that we love about that is that young people have access to acting on that. They can do it at the micro personal level, and then they can start to understand the larger, how that plays up into distribution, refrigeration. What does it really mean when I'm eating locally? What is the international impact of that when the transportation is lessened? And then the other one is plant-based diet. That's like third or fourth in the list. So these are two things that young people have access to right away. And when they start to understand bringing some of these solutions together, like managed grazing, which is also another top solution where cows are being able to like mingle with the crops being created in these same like fields that are being alternated so that they're really, that manure is getting down and the hooves are putting it back into the earth. They start to understand how the natural ecosystem performed and thrived for all those years before human intervention of this kind of big agriculture. And so they start to get these kind of linking ideas between the different solutions. And once they start to understand that, we really push the food thing because that's something young people can feel and do, and it's an embodied solution that they can start acting on. So we start to really help them understand how that doesn't have to be all black and white, because that's like a way of, getting people away from uh, taking on new behaviors, is saying it has to be black or white, but finding those nuances of like, finding these ways of like starting to transition towards a plant-based diet, but still having some butter and whipped cream on the side. So like you're just moving towards it. And once they start to focus on these solutions that are within their grasp, they start to feel more empowered. Because we really the recycling isn't doing as much as that's all everybody ever goes
Yeah,
to. And,
exactly.
so much of our plastics aren't even being
No.
recycled. We just have to consume less.
Yeah.
So when you start really looking at we can't just keep replacing the amount of energy we're using with clean energy. We have to look at how much energy we're consuming and how much we require for our food to be brought to us. And there's all these different levers that we can be pulling on to be consuming less energy,
Yep.
to be producing less plastic that would be recycled.
Yeah, and recycling itself is an energy intensive process. It's
Yes, of course.
yeah. I taught a green media class last year, and that was kind of one of the big things that I talked to students at the end of it, like what are the big things they got out of it, and
Yeah.
according to some of the stuff we read and watched, they were really like, oh wow, like meat and food,
Yes.
that's where it all is in terms of things we can act on and
Yeah.
move on quickly. And that's kind of what I'm talking about in some of these more disruptive conversations, because a lot of
Yes.
people, it's like, don't talk about diet, don't talk about culture, because people might think you're telling them that their traditions are wrong or bad.
Yes.
And it's more complicated than that, but it's a touchy subject that
Hmm.
you
Well, it's so funny because we love change as much as we fear it,
yeah,
and we're drawn towards it.
right. We want change in
I found a
fashion.
lot of success.
Change in fashion every year, but don't tell me to
I
change my
know.
food.
It's funny because I found a lot of success as well by pulling on the lever of sustainable fashion.
Mm,
Because young people are especially with like high school, college age participants, that they are really looking to source their identities through their
right.
fashion choices. And by claiming sustainable choices of thrifting, reusing, regifting, repurposing, they find a lot of opportunity for expression.
Mm,
And they also find that they can claim these lifestyles that aren't so impactful.
yeah, for sure. Oh, that's cool. Well, you put on this show in cities all over the world. Can you tell some
Hmm.
stories about how the performances turned out differently or similarly in various places, and
Yes,
and what you've learned from kind of seeing that play out in so many different contexts?
great. So when I was in London, I did at first a week residency with the University of East London, and got their undergraduate students to be the mentors for us going into an middle school. And it was the whole middle school who took it on in East London. And this middle school, they integrated into their classes. So every class period was working towards the issues in the show for the entire week. And then we did this performance where the middle school students did the performance of Shine, and they came up with ingenious solutions because they were really grounded in all of their different classes. So they were really, nuanced and very cool, really grounded, localized solutions that they were putting forth. And we did it as an all school assembly. So it's in a gymnasium with the worst acoustics you can imagine.
Oh,
But
yes, the
we had a
worst.
sound system they could hear. We had kids butt cheek to butt cheek sitting next to each other in their little uniforms next to each other, just crammed in there. And they were the fifth graders, fourth graders, third graders who came to watch their middle school, giants performing for them. And there was like about 110 people in the performance itself. So it was
Wow.
really an exercise in controlled chaos with the University of East London students helping to shepherd it around. But it had so much energy to it. And those kids who were witnessing their near peers, you know, communicate to them, there was not a peep in the house. They were just not fidgeting, not
Wow.
bugging each other, and just watching and witnessing their near peers share this story of survival with them and thrivable future. Like they were listening. And I love that because I don't think young people want to just have adults tell them what it should be, because they're going to say, you're the same adults who got us in this pickle. Let's start thinking of ways that are going to be in our best interest, because that's a radically different thing. And they really look to those. I really have found a lot of success with working with that peer to near peer model, where young people are really being able to listen to those who are just a few steps before them and really welcoming them in. And then the thing that's great is the final song invites everybody to get up and dance to it. And it was pretty impressive that there was a gymnasium full of kids just going bananas. And there at the very end, we let out these big 36-inch diameter, huge balloons of multicolors that everybody has to keep in the air, like keeping their solutions afloat. And it is a party. It's great. I mean, it's fun. I kind of love designing these moments where there's just this big release that is associated with a celebratory song and movement and just just like that kind of like like a geyser of community celebration. And that was a peak experience. I think London was really a wonderful one. And all the other places too, but that one really stood out as those young people being really riveted by the performance of their peers.
That's really cool. And is there anything that really surprised you or took a major left turn that you weren't anticipating?
Well, one of the things that I found really interesting when we did it in Malope, South Africa, we were working with a school, and they really wanted to tie it into female hygiene, about it being about young women having access to schooling by being able to deal with their menstrual cycles. And if you look at the second most impactful solution for reversing global warming, according to Project Drawdown, it's health and education, which is a little bit of a euphemism for women's access to school around the world and women's access to reproductive health. And so this idea of really taking on some of the top barriers for young women to be able to continue on in school, which is being able to deal with their menstrual cycle, that was really cool. And that's what we did a play about.
Wow.
And we did it for all genders, and everybody was in on it. And we went into, part of the play was we went into we did some process work on what is the reproductive cycle of a woman. And we went in and we did a song about ooh, ah, ah, ooh, 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 ovulation, ooh, ah, ah. And we were we're dancing to the different parts of the, down from the fallopian tubes, down into the uterus goes the egg, and, flushing, all of us doing the flushing it out. And everybody was into it. They're totally doing it when you make it into a song and a movement.
Wow, that's super cool. Well, that's, I think, part of the brilliance of this form, too, is its ability to adapt to particular cultural context that it's in. And that, that's another great thing about live theater in general that, is lost in our more fixed media. I'm a filmmaker, so part of that problem. But, once you put it on screen, it's fixed. It's not.
Yes. The ability to be nimble and responsive in the moment and to be adjusting in that, that's all these oral traditions that have, lasted for so long. We thought it was such a great thing when we got the written word. And it's not,
Yeah.
That fixes it in time. So then we're doing plays by Shakespeare they're great, but they might not be as relevant to what's happening right now as something we would create right now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we lost, with every technological advancement, much is gained and much is lost. And we forget about what is lost oftentimes.
Yeah, and making the most of these great innovations, but putting them in the context of our own localized communities and really listening to every sector of our population and benefiting from their perspectives and their contributions.
Yeah. I was really hit by that. Years ago, I was in South Louisiana after the BP oil spill, working on a project and working with a Native American community there. And I met some of the elders, and they were just amazingly animated and brilliant storytellers, and just so much personality and character. And then, I found out at some point that many of them were illiterate. They weren't allowed to go to school. They were, experienced some horrendous segregation, but either didn't learn to read or didn't learn to read very well. And then in the next generation, a lot of those societal inequality problems were fixed, and literacy rates went way up. But so much of that culture was lost in the transition to writing and television and everything else.
Yep.
And it's such a complicated, two-sided soared.
Well, and it's interesting that part of the genesis of this project was work with the Navajo Women's Energy Project in the Tuba City area in the Western Agency of the Navajo Nation. And it was the women saying, we want some form of energy awareness for our youth. We want them to have this and we want to hear their voices. So that was really part of the genesis of the project, was to say, okay, let's do some arts-based clean energy exploration. And then it ended up becoming a show. And we launched, the first time it was done was at Tuba City High School with the Dene and Hopi casts primarily.
That's awesome. Well, you're at University of Colorado Boulder, and you're based in the theater department, but you're also an associate of the environmental studies program, which is an unusual relationship, but it also happens to be the same one I have here at the University of Buffalo.
That's fantastic.
Except I'm in media study rather than theater. But I'm curious, especially as somebody who's kind of in a similar, strange, unusual position. What's been your experience being, an artist in the environmental realm, which tends to be really dominated and controlled by scientists and policy folks?
Well, I think that, I'm old enough that environmental studies programs didn't even exist when I was going to college.
Right.
Like they were just starting to pop up. So, you get a lot of self-taught, but you just start going to all the international conferences and hearing, I was for a long time, I was going to the World Renewable Energy Forum and meetings because I was working a lot around the nexus of clean energy, women's rights, and the alleviation of poverty. So when you start going to these conferences and meeting the key players, hearing people like Vandana Shiva speaking at the Rio Plus 20 conference, you really start to understand what's at stake, and you start to piece together a really rich and deep and nuanced understanding, along with reading and, keeping up with the literature and all that. And so I think if anything, my experience has been really rich. And I think I'm lucky to be in the time that I am, that we're really, these interdisciplinary pursuits are being rewarded.
Yeah.
We started a center here at the University of Colorado, interdisciplinary, with psychology and environmental design and eBio and all these things, where it's the Center for Creative Climate Communication and Behavior Change, and C3BC. And we're just thriving. It's really rich having all these colleagues who are coming at it from different directions, but we're all still going towards, how do we communicate climate in a way that's going to make a difference, that's going to inspire action.
That's super cool. Yeah, that's really great. I need to talk to you more about that stuff.
I know, let's keep in touch, definitely.
Because that's what I do also. Well,
I think that we found that, we got an endowment for our Inside the Greenhouse, which was our first kind of initiative where, somebody came and gave us an endowment. We didn't even ask. And they're just like, yes, please do that. Please communicate climate in a way that's going to actually go around predetermined and pre-established barriers. Right. We had the Argosy Foundation came to us and said, we're so sick of people screaming at each other about climate. Here, you're doing this work around climate comedy. What would you do with this funding and what could you accomplish? We're like, oh, we'd do plenty.
Right.
And so we have these relationships with these foundations that realize that communication is key.
Yeah, totally. Yep. Yeah, and a lot of folks are slow to get onto this, but it's coming around.
Yeah. Well, we can have all the science we want, but if it's not being utilized, or if it's not being received or even believed, then we've got a problem.
Yeah, and one thing I remind folks of all the time is, we've had pretty much all the science we needed in the 80s and 90s to really make massive changes to our culture.
Yeah, we were like, okay, we should make a change. And the problem is fossil fuel consumption. Okay. We've just been doing nuanced things and we've come up with some technological solutions, but really the solution is use less energy, consume less plastics, fossil fuel-based products.
Yeah. And, that was even, Eisenhower mentioned it in, what was it, the 50s in a presidential speech. It's like, it was known a long time ago, and it was pretty much, we had everything we needed by the 80s, but it's not been a lack of science that's not allowed us to move forward with this.
Well, you have a school curriculum for Shine, which you mentioned
Yes,
earlier, and I love that part of it. Can you talk about how these materials are used and how someone who's interested in adopting the performance at their
you
school
bet.
might start?
Yes. So if you go to enactingclimate.org, Patrick Chandler created a curriculum based on the musical experience that is just wonderful. It has so many resources. And note, it's really good to note that this was not created by Patrick and I at the University of Colorado, but we really co created it with teachers at Stober Elementary School in Golden, Colorado, and with their young fourth, fifth grade classrooms. And it's a curriculum that can really be used as low as fifth grade, I think is probably the youngest you want to go. And then it's really been successful in middle schools, in high schools, and even in college applications. I've had great success. People love getting physical and exploring this and coming up with their own solutions. So all the materials that you need in order to, kind of in a module sense, you could take some of the grab and go curriculum items that would support the exploration of all the themes within the musical and then the mounting of the musical and all the everything you would need, all the songs, all the if you want to use a choreography created by Arthur Frederick, all those supplies are on the Inside the Greenhouse website under How to Act Up, and you'll just see the Shine button there, and that would lead you to all that you would need in order to mount the musical. The other thing is, my name is Beth Osnes, University of Colorado. Look me up on the theater department website. I am there to be the most encouraging, helpful person, and Patrick Chandler as well. So, we are here to give any kind of, professional development training you need to feel confident doing it. But the other thing I would encourage people to do is your young people know how to do this. There will be leaders within any class who are going to grab this and run with it. So a teacher needn't be an expert in theater and performance to have this be part of their curriculum. They can really use the talent in the room to, really just take these grab and go curriculum and just let their young people experience it in a more embodied, fun, experiential manner.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I love all this work you're doing, getting young people to move their bodies, think
Yeah.
creatively, invest themselves in the climate struggle. Thank you so much for this work and for talking to me about it today.
Oh, it was a pleasure. And I love that you're doing this podcast and getting these stories out into the world. I thank you for that.
Thank you so much for listening to the Chrysalis podcast. Please subscribe at johnfiege.earth, where you can also find show notes and all episodes of the podcast, plus my writing, photographs, and films. I want to send a very special thank you to all of our paid subscribers. Your membership allows us to grow, flourish, and remain free and ad-free for everyone. Your belief in the work that we're doing and your generous support mean the world to me and the podcast team. Thank you.